recording now. So last time we just talked about the classes and the objects, and we pretty much worked on the example of a bank account. So we worked on a bank account example. So now today we're going to continue to talk about the class, and we're going to continue to talk about a class and the objects. So again, so during the discussion, I'm probably going to go back to the example again. So we definitely going to probably definitely going to modify the example. Now in Java class, when you define a Java class, so you're going to have, two actually areas. One is called a fields. Okay, that's mostly it's called a member variables, and also methods, and then we call the member method. Okay. Now methods basically used to manipulate the field variables we just talked about. Like for bank account, we actually define a couple of field, right? One is the balance, the other one is account owner, and we also talk about the account ID, but we haven't actually done much about this. Now there are a couple of actually special methods um, that are used in most of the Java class. One type of methods is called a mutator. Okay, and the other type is called accessor. Okay, uh, so what is a a mutator method may basically modify a classes fields, and the accessor method basically uh, access the fields, and but may not modify the class fields. Sometimes the mutator is called a setter, and also the accessor is called a getter. Uh, so in the class we just talked about, the bank account class. Okay, in the bank account class, let's move to the repair again. So in the bank account class, um, we have deposit, we have withdraw, and we have a transfer, and we have some other methods called get balance and get owner, account owner, get account ID, something like this, and set account owner. Now, these methods, if you look at the method name, most likely if you see any method start with get, most likely these are the type of method called accessor. Okay. Okay, these are the accessors. And the setter is actually mostly the mutator, or it's so that's the mutator. Okay, because we're going to change the account owner, and also let's see. We only have one mutators. We can change the account owner. And we can also, for example, we can also define a method called, public um, void set balance, right? So we can actually set the balance. When you say set a balance, then basically you're gonna, you know, specify how much you want to set balance. Basically, gonna say balance equals amount, whatever amount you want to set. Okay. Yeah, that could be another uh, mutators. So the mutator is very simple. It just set the fields for this class, and accessor is basically just get the value for you know for the fields. Okay. Now in most of the Java class, sometimes so far we define all these public methods. So these public methods can be accessed from outside the class. So people can define, a class object, say bank account, and my checkings account equals new bank account. So basically, you set up you create the object for bank account. You can create another object called my savings account, or John's savings account, or Mary's checking account. So you can set up various different objects. Okay. Now, so far, all the methods are public methods. So that means once I create the object, once I create the object called, say, bank account, so my checking account equals new bank account. Okay. And then you can actually use the mutators, right? Say my checking account dot set balance. Because once you create the object, my checking account, what is the balance? The balance is zero, right? Because when you actually see the um, when you actually see the method, let's see, um, when you create this bank account, you see that the balance is initialized to zero. So then you hope that you can actually set an account. Okay. So now set a balance. I'm sorry. So my checking. So I just create the second set balance. Honestly, set a balance is not really necessary, but I just want to illustrate the concept. What is this mutator? So really, set balance is really not necessary. So you don't need to create a method called set balance. But I did. But just give you the idea that you can actually, initially when the object is created, the balance is zero. So I can set a balance to 5,000. That's fine. You just set the value. But to create the bank account, this set balance is really a dangerous method, right? Because if you allow to use the set balance, then you can change you can change the amount, you know, balance amount. So it doesn't matter how much balance you have. You have $1 million in your bank account, and then suddenly some people call the method called a set balance. They change the balance to 5,000. Okay. that's not realistic. That's not really, reasonable. So that's why um, set balance is not. It is actually a mutate, but it is really not a good method. So that's why I just say, okay, I can create this method, but I don't really want to keep it. I still want to delete that method. Now, if you really want to change the balance, if the initial balance is 0, you don't have to call set balance. What do you need to call? If the initial balance is 0, and if you want to add a $5,000, you can call deposit, right? The deposit can basically add 5,000 on the current balance. If the current balance is 0, then add 5,000 will make the balance 5,000. But once some people create the balance, you really don't want to set a balance, because set a balance means that you just actually say whatever the amount amount are in your your bank account, I'm gonna reset to something I want to set. That's so rude, right? Because you're probably gonna actually suddenly, you know, take all the money away and set the value to 0 or to other value. So that's really not nice. So for bank account, I think deposit is more reasonable function to change the balance. Okay, not a set. Set are gonna suddenly change the value from whatever to that value. So that's not good. Now in Java, you can define certain of a methods, which is a private method. Okay, you can create private methods. Now, if you define a private method, then this method cannot be called. Okay, so for example, if a method in the bank account, in the bank account, if I define a method which is a private method, uh, I call private whatever the method is, then I cannot call, say, like this, say deposit 500. So this way, I can actually add 500 into the balance. And this, you can call the method by calling the object name dot deposit. Now I can do this because deposit is a public method. But if you define a method which is private, you cannot call the method by my checking account dot the method name if it's private. Just like the private field, right? You can say balance is a private field. So you cannot directly say my checking account dot balance equals 5 or equals, $150, right? You cannot directly, change the actual balance using the assignment, because balance is defined as a private. Okay. So same thing with the private method. So the private method, but why people want to use the private method? Because sometimes people want to create a method, and this method can be called only by the other member methods. Okay. So then you can use so these methods are many times called helper methods, because it's only used, it can only be called internally, not by the outside. Okay, so that's called by private helper methods. And then now, so the next actually section 7.5, we're going to talk about the initialization and the constructors. Okay, now remember, so in the bank account, we create a couple of fields: balance, account owner, right? And then we initialize the value. The balance was initialized to 0. And the account owner was initialized to John Doe. Okay, so which is generic name. However, Java also allows people to initialize the balance and account owners case by case, which means when I create a different object, I can initialize the balance and initialize the account owner differently. So for each actually object, I can initialize a different balance. I can initialize different account owner. Okay. Now, but using the initialization like the one we just did, okay, you know, this initialization is not going to serve the purpose. Okay. So this initialization will not serve the purpose. If I put the initializer over here, that means when I create any actual object of bank account, so the balance is always zero, always zero. The account owner is always John Doe, right? So then you can change the account owner by calling the object name dot set account owner by calling the method. So then I can change the name from John Doe to whatever the name I want to change to. Okay. Now in Java, we can use a special method, and this special method can be used to initialize the field, initialize the balance, initialize account owner. And that initialize is like more like a customized initialization. So which means for different bank account object, I can initialize these value, initialize the different values. Okay. This way, you can use some kind of a special method, and these methods are called constructor. Okay. Now the constructor, you know, a program can initialize fields in the field declaration. That's what we have been doing for the bank account. Okay. Any object created of the class type will initially have those values. Just like a balance. You say private double balance equals 0.0, 0.00. String, a private string, account owner equals John Doe, right? So that's what we do. Then we can do the customized initialization using constructor. Okay. A constructor is a special method. Um, it can be called without any argument. And this constructor is called the default constructor. Okay. And the constructor has the same name as the class. So that means the method, which is called a constructor, use the same name as the class name. So for example, like a bank account. So the constructor name is also called a bank account. Okay. A constructor method has no return type. You cannot define a return type like a get a balance. So then you basically return a balance, right? Return balance. But constructor has no return value. Okay, return type. Not even void. You cannot, typically when a method has no return type, you type void, right? Means there's no return value. But a constructor has no return value. And also you cannot put void before constructor. Okay. Now, in this particular example, bank account example, the class called bank account. Now, if you look at all these methods and you cannot find a constructor, right? So in this case, we assume that there's a constructor in this method, and it's a default constructor. The default constructor basically contains no parameters, and normally it doesn't do much. Default is just default constructor, right? And so in this particular case, like a bank account, we don't see the constructor. That means a default constructor is used. Okay. Now, what is the default constructor? We're going to talk about this later. But let's say I want to create a constructor. Okay. I want to create a constructor. So what are you going to do? What are you going to do for the constructor? So you can do this. Okay. Let's say I define a method, public method. Constructor should be public mostly. And then the constructor name should be the same as the class name. Right? So class name is bank account. So then I create a method called constructor, and the name of the constructor is bank account. Okay. Now, in here, the purpose of the constructor is to initialize the fields. Okay. Now, so basically, in this method, instead of actually doing the initialization over here, I can actually create a constructor and do the initialize inside the constructor. So I'm going to say balance equals 0.0 and account owner John Doe. So I can create a constructor like this. Okay. So, and then I don't have to initialize the value over here when I declare these field variables. So I'm gonna actually, when I call this, I call so that's a constructor. So in the constructor, I just initialize these value. Okay. Now, because in here, when I call the constructor, I do not provide parameters. So there's an empty parameter. So that means you can say this is a default constructor because you don't need to provide any arguments for the constructor. Okay. Now, so this is basically the same as the other case, same as initialize over here. But I just actually use the constructor to do so. Okay. So I can actually say Java C bank account .java. So I can compile it, no problem, and I can run it using called Java and the bank account. So I can do all these things. So I can call, in the main method. Just hopefully you remember these method call, right? However, you know, I can create the, this, if you want to create a default constructor, then you can do this. But however, I don't want to actually use the default constructor. I want to create a constructor that I can, during the creation of the bank account object, I want to initialize the balance for this particular object. Okay, so the initial balance may not be zero. So that's typical, right? So when I go to the bank, I want to open an account. So then the clerk in the bank, she probably gonna actually, open the account for you. And probably if this software is written in Java, it could be, she's actually just create a new object, a bank account object for you, and that's your bank account. So then you're gonna say, I want to create an account, and I want to actually initially put the $500 in my account. So you can actually create the account object with initial balance 500, not 00. Okay. So then you can create your personalized constructor. Okay. Now in my personalized constructor, I want to initialize the field variables. Okay. So the first one I want to put in here, parameter is, okay, I call it initial amount. Okay. Then I call string owner. Okay. So I provide the initial amount, and I provide the name of the owner. Okay. So now during the initialization, instead of put the balance equals 00, what I need to put? Okay. I can put the initial amount. Instead of actually assign John Doe to the account owner, I can use account owner I just provide by this. Okay. Now that's a constructor. This is not a default constructor. Now, once I change I add a constructor over here, and then during the function call, then when I say bank, my checking account, new bank account, then you have to put something in here. Because when you create a bank account, that's my checking account is a variable object. It's an instance variable. So that's the object, okay, of a bank account. And then this is actually the call to the constructor. Okay. So that's why normally why I put the bank account parenthesis, because I try to call the constructor. And why I want put the parenthesis without any argument, because I use the default constructor. But now I'm not using default constructor. I use the constructor I just created. So then in my actually constructor, I need to provide two arguments. The first argument is the initial amount, right? Yeah, bank account initial amount. And the second one is the owner. So then what I'm gonna do is instead of create a bank account and then set account owner, so I don't have to do this anymore, because during the creation of account, I can provide account owner. And so initially I can still put 0.0. That's the initial balance when I create the account. And then the owner, instead of actually, I actually provide my own owner name. Okay. For my savings account, I want to put the $500 as an initial balance. And the owner, I can put the Brady Chen. Okay. When I call this, I can do this. I can do it. So then I don't have to set the account owner, because the reason I set the account owner is because when the account was initially created, the default name John Doe was used, but not anymore, because this time I create the account, bank account, and I call the constructor, and I actually provide the initial balance and the provide owner. So when I call this bank account with the argument, first 00, second Brady Chen, and then these argument will be passed to the parameter initial amount, which is 00, and the owner, which is Brady Chen. And then initial amount 00 will be assigned to the balance, and the owner, Brady Chen, will be assigned to the account owner. So then I create the, so my checking account will have an initial balance 00. My owner is Brady Chen. So now when I actually put the deposit in my checking account, because initial balance is 0, so it's still actually 1 million. But for savings account, I put the 2 million, but initial account balance is 500. So then the value is 2,500,000, right? So let's actually try again. Okay, let's see. My checking account, Brady Chen. My checking account balance, 1 million. My checking account new balance, okay, so after I deduct some amount, right? My checking account new balance, after actually withdraw 5,000, it's 995,000. My savings account is Brady Chen. My savings account balance is 2,500,000, right? Because in the constructor, I actually put 500 as the initial balance. Okay. And then you can do the transfer. That's fine. Okay. Now, any questions? So that's the constructor. And then one good thing about a constructor is, so the constructor, if a class does not have a program-defined constructor, then the Java compiler implicitly define a default constructor with no arguments. Okay. Now, the other thing we want to talk about later is, it's called construct overloading. Okay. So remember, Java constructor is a special method for initializing all fields, like a balance and account owner. And like any other methods, a Java program can have multiple constructors. Remember the Java method overloading? You can define a couple of methods with the same name, right? And however, in order for the user to know which in order for the Java to judge which method you're actually going to call, because you use the same name for different methods, but when you actually use call this function, use the name, call this function, which actually particular method implementation going to be called. Now Java use something called a signature. So they actually, for different methods with the same name, they try to make it different by providing the different parameters. Okay. So same thing with the Java constructor. Okay. So the Java constructor, you can create multiple Java constructors, but you have to make sure these Java constructors have, different signature. Okay. So let's see. So constructor overloading is a concept of having more than one constructor with different parameters list in such a way that the constructor performs different tasks. Sometimes you want to provide that kind of flexibility because you want to create for example, you want to create a bank account. And for some of the bank account, you still want to create a bank account with the default setting. Or you want to create a bank account with different initialization structure, right? So let's go back to the example again to see how can we deal with a multiple constructor. So I can also create a constructor. So let me see. I'm lazy. I'm copy paste constructor. Okay. I have two constructor, but I cannot just leave as it is because these two constructors is duplicated. So I want to create a constructor without parameter. So that's a default constructor. Now, if I want to create a bank account object, if I use the default constructor, then you cannot there's no argument, right? So cannot do this. So the default constructor, I still want to create the default constructor with balance 0 and the owner name down bundle. Still want to do this. Okay. Or if you want, I can create even more constructors. So another constructor. So in that constructor, I just want to provide the account owner. Okay. Now this is not default constructor. This is another constructor. However, I don't provide the initial balance. So initial amount, I don't provide. So in that case, so I just want to say, okay, I want to assign the owner I just provide. So the account owner going to be the owner I just provided. Okay. However, balance, I don't provide a balance. So I can still use the default balance value. So I can put the balance equals 0.00. So in this case, I use another create another constructor with only one parameter. Okay. And then with that parameter, I can, assign the owner name, but not the balance. So I still use the default balance value, which is 0.0. So now I create 3 bank account, right? Now, how should I know which balance, which constructor I'm going to use? Okay, so I can do this. Okay, so for the in the main method, okay, so I want to create some more object. Let me copy paste. John's account. Now for the John's account, I'm not going to actually provide this. I use the balance with no parameter. So then when you call my checking account, my savings account, I provide the parameter. So Java knows if you actually call the constructor with parameters, and then this particular constructor will be called. Okay, this particular constructor will be called. Now, if I create a John's balance, if I create something called John's account, right? And I just only use the default balance. Now, in this case, I can say John's account let's say if I print out so if I say get account owner, call John's account, okay? Oh, it's okay, yeah, that's right. So if I want to type system dot out dot println, so the owner of John's account is, so if I actually say this, say print out the owner of John's account is, what is the owner for John's account? Anyone has the answer? What's the owner for John's account? If I print this one out, the first print out statement.
It's account owner equals owner name, so it would be John's account.
Okay. The owner of the John's account is, because I use the default constructor, right?
So just bank account?
Okay, let's go back. If I call create a John's account and I see someone type, okay, Alice just type a Brady Chen. Do you really think the account owner is a Brady Chen for John's account? Because when I create the John's account I call the default constructor. What is the default constructor? The default constructor is this. Right?
Oh, so John Doe, because that's what the default is set.
Yeah. John Doe is the one. not Brady chain, because I use default account. When I use default account, I do not provide the argument. So if I do not provide the argument, now in the implementation of the default constructor, it is 0 for the balance, and oh, I'm sorry, that top one. 0 for the balance, and the John Doe as the owner. Let's just check. Okay, it's kind of messy because I have so many output. So the owner of John's account is John Doe, right? And if you want to type, the balance, say John's account dot get balance, and what is the balance initially before I put any deposit? The balance is 0, right? It's a 0.00, right? So that's how I create another one. Now I can actually call another. So that's why I can create a different bank account object. So my checkings account, my savings account, I call the constructor, which I provide the balance and the owner. So the balance is 0, owner is Brady Chen. Balance is 500 for the savings account, owner is Brady Chen. So the owner is Brady Chen. But when I call John's account, I call default constructor. So the constructor only actually, the balance is 0 and the owner is John Doe, right? So then I can create another. Let's do another one. Okay, now instead of John's account, I put the I say Ann's account. Now in here, I'm gonna provide an argument. Okay. And then let's print out. I add another print out in the main method. So it's kind of messy in my main method because I add too many print out statement. Ann's account. The owner of Ann's account is, I'm gonna call the Ann's account dot get account owner, right? So what do you think? What is going to be printed out? Now, if you try to understand what account owner will be printed out, you need to check what is the account owner, right? So what is the account owner for Ann's account? Now, you need to figure out, okay, when I create Ann's account, I call the constructor that contains only one argument, and which is a string, Ann Johnson. So then I go back and check all these 3 constructors. Oh, I could put the constructors here. Is the first constructor is the default constructor with no argument. Okay, no parameter. So that means that's not Ann's constructor, right? The constructor I used to create Ann's account, because in Ann's account I provide one argument. That's the string, which is Ann Johnson. So then I check the second one. I can say bank account and the string owner. And the third one, bank account, the first one is double, the second one is string owner. So which constructor I actually used when I create Ann's account? this one, right? Because when I call the constructor for n's account, I use one parameter. So now the Java going to check the signature. So I call the bank account, the constructor, and only one argument is used. And this argument is a string type. So N Johnson is a string. So then I'm going to check and say definitely not this one, definitely not this one, and this is the constructor I used. So when I use this constructor, so the N Johnson, the string going to be passed to the owner. So the owner is N Johnson assigned to account owner. And what's the balance? I do not provide a balance when I call the constructor. So the balance is actually used as a 0, 0. Okay. So let's compile it again. Clean that up. It's kind of slow. Come on. I don't know why it's so slow. No, this is not right. So let me actually quit it. Okay. So let me actually compile again. Okay. Looks like something is wrong. But you know what would be the print out for N's account? The owner going to be N Johnson, right? And what's the balance? Balance of N's account is balance. Ah, finally, I got this. I need to recompile because I added one more. I added one more line here. Okay, that's quick. I don't know why it's so slow initially. Okay, so let's see. The owner of John's account is John Doe. The owner of Ann's account is Ann Johnson. The balance of Ann Johnson and Ann's account is 0, 0. That's expected, right? Because why? Right? Because when I create Ann's account, I call the constructor, which I only actually assign the owner's name, which is Ann Johnson. But I did not provide the balance. So in which they use the 0 as the balance amount. Okay, so this is the constructor I called when I create N's account. So just keep that in mind. If you define a multiple constructors, you have to make sure each constructor has different parameters. Okay, either different number of parameters or even the parameter numbers are the same, the type of the parameters should be different. Okay, you have to make sure they have a different parameters list. Okay, now so when you call the constructor, depend on the argument you provide. Java try to match your argument with the parameter list and call the appropriate constructor. So that's That's how the multiple constructor actually going to be used. Okay. So that's called a constructor overloading. Okay. Make sure you understand this. Okay. Now let's actually talk about the main method in the class. Okay. So far, when we define create any program, we create the class and then we create the main method inside the class. And this main method is a statical method, right? So the main method can be defined within a program-defined class and create objects of the class type. Okay. So I can create the main method, and inside the main method, I can create the object of this class, like this bank account, right? This bank account, I have a main method in the bank account, which is at the very bottom, okay? And then inside the main method, I can create an object of the bank account, like my checking account, my savings account, John's account, Ann's account. So I can create a couple of different objects inside the main method. Now, main method is a statical method, okay? So main method is statical method, that is independent of class object, okay? It's an independent of class object. So main actually can access other statical methods and the statical fields of the class, but cannot directly access non-statical methods or fields. Okay, you cannot directly access the non-statical methods or field. What does that mean? Okay, so that means, let's go back to the account again. So in the main method, I can call, this like a get account owner, right? This get account owner is defined in the bank account class. However, since the main method is a statical method, so I cannot directly call get account owner. I cannot do that. If I want to call get account owner, in the main method, I have to create an object, like my checkings account, my savings account, John's account, Ann's account. And then I can say my checking account or John's account dot get account owner. You see the point here? In the main method, I cannot directly call get account owner because people are going to ask, get account owner, whose account? And then you have to specify the object of this. Okay, so this is John's account dot get account owner. So this is the account owner of John's account. And then this is account owner of Ann's account. Okay, so in the main method, in the statical method, I have to define the object, then use the object name dot the method name. Okay. Now, if I actually call for example, if I call get account owner from any member methods, that means the method with no statical, then I can directly use the get account owner. Okay, I can directly call this, but not in the statical method, because statical method is just a method that happened to be implemented in the bank account. But the statical, does not specifically, belongs to a particular object. It's just it's a very general method. So main can access, so a program must create objects within the main method to call non-statical methods or other objects. Okay. Now, so far we have talked about many things about class and objects. So class basically represent a group of stuff with the same characteristics. Uh, these, you know, so each, for each class you need to create many objects. Each object which has the actual value for the class field variables. Okay, so each object represent a particular things for the class, like a bank account. Bank account is a class, but however, when you create the object of a bank class, like my account, my checkings account, my savings account, that's an object of a bank account. And the bank account can define many actual variables, field variables. And my account we have to make sure when you create an object of the account, you have to assign value to each of these field variables. Like a balance, you have to have a value for the balance, either $0 or $100 or $1 million. Okay. Now, once you define a class, and once you create a class object, now the class object, is an object. So when you actually refer to it, mostly it should be used as reference. So basically, a reference is a variable type that refers to an object. Remember, there are two actually different types. One is the primitive, right? Type. The other one is reference type. Okay. Now the difference between these is, okay, so primitive type like int x. So that means I create in a memory, Java can create reserve a space, and that space is reserved as x, and which takes like 32 bits for the int. Okay. And so when I assign a value 20, the 20 will be stored in this location. Now for reference type, if I define like a string or now string is y. So that's a reference type. Okay. So when Java gonna reserve a space for this reference variable. Okay. And then so when you actually assign a value to y, then Java gonna actually find a location in the memory and store this value, and then that location is the memory address, say 1001. That's the memory address. That's the memory location that stores the object. And then Java gonna actually store this memory address into this place. So this is called a reference. So Y actually stores the memory address. Y stores the memory address 1001 to the reference variable y. And that memory address is not the value of y. The value y actually is this. So it's actually the value that the y actually point to. Okay. So y actually point to this object which contains the value CSC1550. Same thing with the class. So if I define a bank account, say my account. Okay. Now remember I put the semicolon here. That means I haven't actually called a constructor yet, right? So I just define a bank account. So then the Java going to reserve a space for my account. And then the space it can reserve is actual reference. It's a reference space. So that space will be eventually store a memory address. Now, next, when I actually call the constructor, called new constructor, and then I call the constructor of a bank account. And in this case, I call a default constructor bank account. Okay, so then when a constructor is called, so the Java going to reserve a memory location, okay, and that memory location going to store the object of this account, and it stores the account information. Now, what is the object contains? The object, if I call the default constructor, so then I have like a balance, which is what's the value of the balance? 0.00. And then account owner, and if I use default constructor, what's the account owner? What's the account owner for the default constructor? What's the account owner for the default constructor? No answer. John Doe, right? John Doe is the default account. Oh, no, okay. So I call the constructor to create an object of account. That account name is called my account. So then I place the object somewhere in the computer memory, and I just remember the computer memory, which is 2050. That's the memory location. That's the memory address. And then I can store this memory address over here in the reference location. So this my account is going to point to the object. Okay. Now that's a difference. So class objects are basically reference variable. Okay. So when I say my account is a type of bank account, so my account is a reference variable. Okay. It's not a primitive variable because my account is basically the value of the my account does not contains all these balance because these balance account owner are created as object and stored somewhere, and my account variable just point to the object. So which means if I create a bank account, his account, and then I'm going to say his account equals my account. So that means my account will be assigned to his account. So that only says his account is created, right? I create his account. So I create his account and with reference variable. And then when I copy my account to his account, I basically only copy the reference. 2050 to that location, 2050. So that means his account can also point to the same class object that the my account points to. So that's the meaning of the reference variable. Okay. I think that's pretty much all I want to talk about for today. I hope you understand the difference between reference and primitive. And the object, the class objects are reference variable. Okay. Any questions?
Nope.